Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama tasliman kathira. In our sessions on the foundations of religion and guidance, today we're going to look at sincere concern and service. We looked last lesson number 11, at the spiritual potential of religion, right? The spiritual potential of religion. Our religion is not just forms, but it has a purpose, which is closeness to Allah, attaining unto the love of Allah. It's to have presence with God. And in lesson 9, we looked at what is the higher aim of the religion. And we looked a little bit at how one turns to God and some of the principles related to that. Today, as we come towards the end of our course, we're going to look at sincere concern, sincerity, and service. What does religion entail? And this begins by looking at one of the comprehensive prophetic counsels. Our beloved Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, summarized all of religion in one definition. He summarized all of religion in one definition. And it's a bit of a shocking definition, because the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, "Ad-deenun nasiha." Religion is nasiha. And even if you're an Urdu speaker, for example, you may know this word. Nasihat. What nasiha, which we translate here sincere concern, but what is nasiha commonly considered? Advice. Right? So the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said in words related by An-Nu'man ibn Bashir, one of the companions, that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, "Ad-deenu nasiha." Sorry, I've got the wrong text there. Okay, it's not Nu'man ibn Bashir. I was kind of confused actually. I was shocked. Sorry. Okay, Bismillah. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, "Ad-deenu nasiha." Religion is nasiha. This word, which commonly means religion is to give advice. That's a common meaning of nasiha, is to give advice. So the companions were confused. So they asked, "Qulna liman?" To whom? Right? Because if you think about it, of the categories of people that you least want to hang out with are people who give you too much advice. One of my teachers says that religious advice follows the laws of supply and demand. The more the supply of advice, the less demand there is for it. Right? People don't want to be told all the time what to do. Just the companions were shocked that how could religion be giving advice? Right? Ad-deenun nasiha. Religion is this word nasiha. They said, to whom? It better be some pretty serious advice. So the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, responded, "Lillahi wa li kitabihi wa li rasulihi wa li a'immatil muslimina wa ammatihim." To Allah and His book and His messenger, and to the leaders of the Muslims and to the common person. So immediately when the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, "For Allah," can you advise Allah? Can you advise Allah? No. Right? That the Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, wasn't using this word nasiha in the sense of giving advice, but in its root meaning, which is sincere concern. Because why do you give advice to somebody? Because you're concerned for them. Right? That's why you advise somebody. And we'll be sharing a more detailed commentary on this, these prophetic words, because it's one of the central prophetic teachings. And we actually did an on-demand course on religion is sincere concern, where we explained this prophetic statement in a number of classes. But the Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, said, religion is sincere concern. It's concern for Allah, concern for the Book of Allah, concern for the Messenger of Allah, concern for the leaders of society and the common person. And this statement, right, that religion is sincere concern, first we remind ourselves, what is religion? Right? What is religion? Anyone remember? We started this course by talking about what is religion. And we've touched upon a number of things. What is this word religion? Deen. Anyone remember? We gave a few definitions. Yeah, deen comes from, one of the senses of the word is, this is your debt to the divine. Right? This is how you discharge your debt to God.
Divine guidance.
Yeah, that's cheating. Okay, so it is divine guidance, right? It's divine guidance, and we'll leave the full definition. You can recap. It was in lesson 1. Right? Religion is a way you live. Right? It's a way you live. It's a way you live. بِمَا دِنْتَ تُدَانْ. As you live, so shall you find. So these religion is what directs you to be able to choose what's ultimately good for you in this life and the next. Right? That's religion. Sincere concern, nasiha. This Arabic word, nasiha, right, which is the common usage of it both in Arabic and in other languages that have taken from Arabic, is to give advice. But the root sense of the word nasiha is to complete, to make something complete, or to make some, or to purify something. So for example, if you have someone stitching some clothes, so you have pieces of cloth that they're cut up. When you complete stitching an item of clothing out of the pieces of cloth, you say in Arabic, nasahtu thob. I did nasiha, this word, to the cloth. Why? Because you completed its potential. Because the cloth, when it's cut up, like what are you going to do? Walk around with a sleeve and a leg and, the front part you're holding on to? It's kind of a bit of a sad show. When you stitch it together, you've fulfilled its potential. Right? Similarly, if you have some honey, and you have to think about the desert, right? The Arabs were in the desert, there's dust all around. So you have honey in which dust and all kinds of things blow over. So if you clean it up, so you only have pure honey left, you say, nasahtu al-asal. I did nasiha, I expressed my concern for the honey. So this term, nasiha, which the Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, said that all religion is this one word. It's not advice. It's not actually sincere. Some people translate religion is sincere counsel. And it's not. Religion is sincere concern. And they defined this word, nasiha, sincere concern, as talabul khair fi haqqil ghayr. It's seeking good with respect to another. And religion is seeking good with respect to another. Or nasiha, sincere concern, is simply to care deeply. You could translate this prophetic word, ad-deenun nasiha. Religion is nasiha. Religion is to care. Right? Religion is to care. Is to care deeply. Is to really care. Religion is to really care. To care about whom? To care about God. To care about the book of God. To care about the messenger of God. And to care about God's creation. Both those in leadership and the common person. Right? Religion is to care deeply. Because when you have this cloth that's all cut up and you stitch it together, you cared. You want to make something good out of this cloth, the honey, right? It's to care, right? So that's right. That's why a believer would there's some things that they delete from their dictionary of usage. One of them is I don't care, because the believer by definition cares. Right? It's just what you do about the care, which may be different from others. Right? So that's how our Prophet defined religion. And we kept this definition towards the end because it encapsulates a lot of what we've looked at before, of how we approach our religion and so on. When the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, was asked, to whom or for whom is this nasiha, is this concern expressed? Right? The Prophet explained, right, in the text, the religion is sincere concern for Allah and for the book of Allah, for the messenger of Allah, and for the leaders of the Muslims and the common person. Right? This expression tells us that there's two types of concern that the believer has. There's two aspects to our life. There's a spiritual dimension to our life, which is our relationship with God. And that's our spiritual concern. Right? And our spiritual concern is expressed in the nature of our relation, is our concern for Allah Himself, who's the ultimate concern. But how do we relate? How do we cultivate a relationship with Allah? We need the book of Allah and we need the messenger of Allah, because that contains, they're the means of guidance from God to God. Right? There are means of guidance from God to God. Right? So that's our spiritual concern. And we'll be looking a little bit at this. But that's not all religion is. Religion is not to pray and fast and then not give a damn. Right? That has nothing to do with prophetic religion. Because just as religion is spiritual concern, religion is social concern. Without which your religion is still not bearing full fruit. Right? But without which your religion is not yet bearing full fruit. And that is the concern for the leaders of the Muslims, meaning the leaders of society, and for the common person. And we'll be looking at these two aspects of concern. And we won't be spending a lot of time looking at the spiritual concern because we've been looking at it the last two lessons. And this reiterates. But the key aspect is that religion isn't just how much you do. Religion really is about how much you care. Right? How much you care. Do you care about Allah? Do you care about the messenger of Allah? Do you care about the book of Allah? But of course, if you care, there has to be some proof. Right? There has to be proof. I really care. But I don't really do anything about it. So, the spiritual concern that religion is sincere concern, for whom? The Prophet replied, peace and blessings upon him, for Allah and for His book and for His messenger. The teachings of our religion are so profound. One of the great North African scholars. Any North Africans with us here? If you're Egyptian, you are North African. They're not particularly African. And, and Egypt is a world unto itself, right? But any non-Egyptian North Africans, we can call the NENAs, right? Non-Egyptian, non-North Africans. Anyone? Wow. Okay. So, one of the great scholars from North Africa, Imam Zarruq, he wrote a work, well over 100 pages explaining this one prophetic statement. Now, what does it mean that religion is sincere concern? This text that we began looking at. And a couple of centuries later, another scholar, Ibn Zirikli, he wrote a commentary in 2 chunky volumes, passes 1,000 pages, explaining out what the implications are of the Prophet's words that religion is sincere concern, or that religion is to care deeply. So, however, if we just take some brief pointers for ourselves, what does it mean that religion is to care for Allah? Right? It is that you nurture your faith. Right? It is that you nurture your faith. Right? That to care for Allah entails that you nurture your faith. Right? Any relationship requires cultivation. And the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said something beautiful about relations. Right? He said, "Bullu arhamakum." Literally, keep your relations moist. Meaning that, just as a plant dries out if you don't water it once in a while, likewise, in your family ties and your ties of friendship, you need to water them. You need to keep them alive. Because if you don't, what happens? Just like a plant, they start withering. And soon they'll die. And no relationship of substance will remain. And the same thing applies to your faith. You need to nurture and cultivate your faith. And the Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, described faith as being a tree, and that tree having branches, and that tree bearing fruit. And we'll be looking at that in the upcoming month. But how do you nurture your faith? There's 5 key meanings that we cultivate. To cultivate your love for God, your love for Allah. To cultivate your reverence of Allah, your sense of awe of Allah, your marvel at the divine. To cultivate your sincerity. Right? Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib said, لو كشف الغطاء لما ازددت يقينا, that if the veil between me and God were lifted, I would not increase in certainty. Right? To nurture true certainty, to cultivate gratitude, and to act. Because all that we do in our religion is a means of cultivating our faith. وَرُجِّحَتْ زِيَادَةُ الْإِيمَانِ بِمَا تَزِيدُ طَاعَةُ الْإِنسَانِ. In one of the great didactic poems on the science of Islamic beliefs, Jawharat al-Tawheed. The author, another North African, Ibrahim al-Laqani, he said, and the chosen position is that faith increases. With all that increases one state of obedience to God. All acts of obedience, all these things that we do, what is their purpose? To cultivate our faith and to increase us in knowledge of God. To increase us in closeness of God, which we've talked about in the previous 2 lessons. So these are meanings that we must cultivate in our relationship with God. Right? That if you're going through your religion unconcerned about where am I with respect to the love of God, you're drifting. If you're unconcerned with stirring a sense of reverence, of awe, of majesty for God, you're just drifting. If you're not concerned about increasing in your degrees of certitude, then you and I are just drifting. If you're not actively cultivating ever deeper degrees of gratitude to God, then if you're not trying to be more grateful, then what is the opposite of being grateful? It's ugly, right? Because the opposite of gratitude is ingratitude, right? And like if someone has wealthy parents, and their parents give them everything, but they're not grateful, what would you call that person? And no insults, like nothing that you can't mention in polite company. Spoiled, right? Spoiled, right? Right? You have everything, right? Right? And we're the dependents of God. We're the dependents of God. Al-khalqu iyalullah. In the prophetic tradition, we don't say we are the children of God. That's a misunderstanding that crept into the biblical tradition. Its children are the dependents of God. Right? Everything we have is from God. So we should be cultivating gratitude to God. And these meanings should spur us to act. Right? They spur us to purposeful action. Likewise, with respect to the Book of God, right? We need to cultivate inward meanings with respect to the Book of God. What are those inward meanings? We have to have love for the Book of God, for the Quran. Why? This is the Book of God. And this is Allah addressing you. Right? You have reverence for that reality, certainty that it's from God, gratitude for the gift of guidance and light and healing that it contains, which moves one to act upon what it calls us to from God. Likewise for His messenger. None of you believes, said the Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, until I am more beloved to them than their parents, their children, and all people. And in another narration, and even their own self between their 2 sides. Right? Right? To nurture true love for the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. To nurture true respect for the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. To nurture certainty in the trueness of his claim to be the messenger of God, in certainty with respect to his teachings. And we've looked at these in earlier lessons, and that's why we've talked about these, because without this clarity, we are drifting. Gratitude for the gift of guidance that the messenger represents. And by nurturing these 4 qualities, to have the urge to act on his example, out of love, out of reverence, out of certainty, out of gratitude. Right? How do we express this spiritual concern? There's 4 things to keep in mind. First, and this is a reiterating of what we looked at last week, so I'm not going to expound on at length. You have to have a spiritual goal in life. If religion is to care deeply, then you have to you have to have a purpose. You have to have a goal. Don't just have worldly goals in life. Right? If someone stopped you on the road and asked you, you had to start having a conversation and said, so what are your goals in life? Have some goals that will last beyond your grave. Right? And the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, used to make supplication. وَلَا تَجْعَلِ الدُّنْيَا أَكْبَرَ هَمِّنَا وَلَا مَبْلَغَ عِلْمِنَا. Do not make this worldly life the greatest of our concerns, nor the limits of our knowledge. Because yes, we have our worldly concerns, we have our worldly skills and abilities, but only a fool would put more emphasis on the perishing than over the everlasting. So have spiritual goals. How are you seeking God in your life? How are you making good with God? Right? People keep thinking about their dream home. What about your eternal homeland? How do you plan to get there? Do you plan to get there? So set spiritual goals. But you don't attain goals except by having means. So you need to have spiritual routines. What are these spiritual routines? مَا جَاءَ بِهِ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صلى الله عليه وسلم. That which the Messenger of Allah has come with. Right? Something of prophetic works, of recitation of Quran, of remembrance, of supplication, of reflection, by morning, by night, after each prayer. A little bit, right? That can change your life direction. To cultivate sincerity, and we've talked at length about this, to nurture sincerity, because above all, Allah seeks to see a heart that seeks Him, right? A chosen friend of God is one who chooses God in all that they do. So God chooses them over all others, right? And the fourth expression of spiritual concern is to give attention to the state of your heart. Give attention to the state of one's heart. Many people now have fitness trackers. They keep track. My heart rate is such and such, and I've walked this number of steps, and whatever else they keep track of, their sleep patterns and all kinds of stuff, their diet, their mood, like all kinds of freaky things. There's some people afraid that humans are going to merge into machines. And there's books written on it, Homo Deus, and all these kinds of scary books that are kind of depressing. Though we know what the end game is, so we don't worry as believers, but what if you had a spiritual fitness monitor on yourself, right? And what's a spiritual fitness monitor? Yarhamukumullah. How is your heart? Right? How is your heart? And this is a question the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, used to ask. One of the companions came to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, by morning time. And the Prophet asked him, كَيْفَ أَصْبَحْتَ يَا حَارِثَةَ? How are you this morning, O Haritha? Okay. And he said, I'm fine, had a good breakfast and ready to go. No, he said, أَصْبَحْتُ مُؤْمِنًا حَقًّا. I find myself this morning a true believer. Prophet asked, how? He said, it's as if I can behold the throne of my Lord manifest. It's as if at this very moment I can behold the people of paradise visiting one another. It's as if I can behold the denizens of hell in their torment. And he described some more of his state. The Prophet, peace and blessings, told him, عرفت فلزم. You know, you have come to know, so hold fast to this meaning. Right? So, how is your heart? one of the great scholars in the Central Asian lands. People used to come to him to engage in spiritual training, in trying to be more conscious of Allah. And he used to do something very interesting with them. He used to get them to weave carpets with them. A very monotonous activity. And he wouldn't teach them anything, or he would teach them everything. Because you just weave carpets with him. At some point during the day, he'd say, stop. And what's the answer? The answer is, what's in your heart? And you'd answer, each person would answer for themselves. That, how conscious of Allah am I? Is my heart full of those qualities that are pleasing to God? Right? Give attention to your heart. The Prophet, peace and blessings be on him, told us more about the heart than anything else. Right? And one of the, he's the greatest doctor, right? Because he was the doctor of hearts. So these are ways to express one's spiritual concern. But that alone is not enough, right? Religion is to care spiritually for Allah, for the Book of Allah, for the Messenger of Allah. And this, of course, requires knowledge. You need to know about Allah. You need to know about the teachings of the Book of Allah. You need to know about the teachings of the Prophet of Allah. Peace and blessings be upon him. But you also have to have social concern, right? That religion is sincere concern also for the leaders of the Muslims, the leaders of society, and the common person. Whereby our Prophet tells us that there's two levels of social concern. There's the collective concern, there's the communal concern. That's the big picture, right? Right? That those in power, right? Political power, economic power, social power, intellectual power, right? There's different types of communal authority. There's political authority, there's religious authority, there's economic authority, there's social power, thought leaders, artists and others who influence society for better or worse. Even things like fashion. Read a little bit about the history of fashion in the 20th century. And don't even read about it. Just look at what people used to wear 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century, and then come to the 20th century. And weird things start happening, right? And that's a type of authority too, right? Right? And there's weird things happening, right? Where's human dignity in dress? Where's the nobility of the human being? Right? Because those meanings get lost. And it just happened by accident that people forgot? No. Right? Right? It's not like that novel by, what was it, the Ishiguro, or there's that mist that took over the island, and everyone started getting bad memory, including the narrator. Right? There's things going on, right? Because there's people, the leaders, and here Muslims is mentioned in the incidental. The leaders of society, and there's different types of leadership. And the believer must have concern for certain fundamental values, for truth, for peace, for justice, for mercy, and for good, right? Or simplified, the believer, the very basis of religion is the preservation of good and the prevention of harm, right? One must have concern for that at the communal level, politically, economically, socially, culturally, religiously, in all these dimensions. And then there's at a social level, right, in one's personal and community relationships, the key to which our beloved Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, is to uphold good character in all its expressions. Right? To uphold good character in all its expressions. This is religion. Right? Religion is to care deeply. Our Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, used to be lengthy in silence. And we should practice this. Avoid if people are quiet in a conversation for 60 seconds, and you won't reach 60 seconds, someone goes for their cell phone and says, I've got notifications. Reimbursement for something or the other. To approve something. Right? No. The Prophet, peace and blessings, used to be lengthy in silence, and some of his silence was spiritual, reflecting about the majesty of God and reflecting about his relationship with God. But his silence was also out of social concern. He used to think about what people needed. What were the needs of God's creation, and how he could facilitate for them the good in the greatest, widest, and most lasting manner. That was from the silence of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, as described by a number of the close companions. Right? And that's one of the things that, if you want to have religion, you must have reflection. And you reflect upon your spiritual relationship with God. We also reflect on your social concern for the good of God's creation. How do you express that? Much can be said about that, but there are four things that we just can touch upon. One is that you need to have active and not just generic dua, active supplication from the heart. So you don't just say, you make these general supplications, oh Allah, forgive the believers, male and female. Say, I intended everybody. No. The sign that you care about something is that you pray for it. Sign that you care for someone is that you pray for them, specifically. So you make specific prayer for people, at both levels. At the bigger picture, you're concerned. Right? The believer would worry about the state of water in the world. Right? Most of planet Earth is water. But it's like like in the Coleridge poem, water, water everywhere, but none of it to drink. Right? We're doing some crazy things with water. They say it's the next oil. That once oil runs out, water will run out. Right? It's freakish. And if you don't think water is under threat in Canada, then you're sleepwalking. Right? And of course, no companies pollute water overseas as much as Canadian companies do. Canada is really nice and looking really nice all over the world. We've got the British touch. Right? Kill him with a smile. But keep smiling as you stab. Right? Our companies are culpable for spreading mercury and lead poisoning across good chunks of South America, West Africa, and elsewhere. We should be worried about these things. Right? There's serious things going on. And we shouldn't, sit around watching what's the next silly thing that some leader south of our border is engaged in. Is not concerned. There are big things we should be concerned about. News is not about entertainment. Right? We have to have, but it begins with turning to the one in whose hand, in whose grasp is everything, and asking Allah to facilitate change. But then if you care, you must give time. Right? The price of concern is time. You have to give time. And the least, right, is zakat. Is strive to give zakat on your time. And there's a lot, we won't go into all the textual basis for this, but the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said that every limb and faculty of the believer owes charity every day and night. Right? So some of the scholars deduce from this, it's not a legal ruling, but if you a basic expression of concern is, are you giving 2.5% of your hours in the week towards some kind of social concern? And 2.5 of 168, how much is it? Roughly. Hey Siri, how much is 2.5% of 168? It's 4.2, right? It's 4 hours a week and change. Okay? That sounds like a lot. It's only 2.5%. And if you're a bit of a slacker, say, okay, I'll only count my waking hours. That's still hopefully 3 hours a week, or 2.5 hours a week if you sleep a lot. Right? Try to give that in some form of actual benefit. Watching the news is not social concern, it's entertainment. How do you make the time? Our beloved Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, said, "Min husni Islam al-mar'i tarkuhu ma la ya'nih." From the excellence of a person's Islam is to leave everything that is not of concern to them. What is of concern to you? We've seen it. What's of concern to you? Right? What will benefit you? Right? What will truly benefit you? And what will enable you to benefit others? That's what concern. And most people are lying. Like, don't say I don't have time. It's a lie. Right? I have all these friends. I'm so busy. I have a friend I wanted to my Uncle Rabbani side of me wanted to get mad at him. But getting too old to get mad too much. You have to be selective about it. So you have time to watch every season of the Turkish, there's a tradition in theater that people would not refer to Macbeth, like actors would not refer to Macbeth by its actual name. They would call it the Scottish play or other such things because they thought that's superstitions. We don't believe in superstitions, but the Scottish play or such other titles because they thought it would lead to misfortune in your acting career if you mentioned Macbeth. Anyways, but the Turkish series, people watch like hundreds of hours within a couple of months of the Turkish series, right? Cut out a little bit of the nonsense. Not all of it necessarily, but the most egregious nonsense in your life, get rid of it, do something meaningful with it. That is religion when done for Allah. Thirdly, actively work with others of sincere concern. We know from prophetic teachings that Yadullahi ma'al jama'ah, Allah's hand is with the group. Al-jama'atu rahma, the group is mercy. Why? Because when people come together, they're able to engage in exponentially greater benefit than a person on their own. Right? And also, when you're alone, you can feel overwhelmed. The Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, al-jama'atu rahmah, the group is mercy. Wal-furqatu adhab, and being alone is torment. If you care, you say, I want to do such and such thing, but you're alone, what can you get done? Generally, there's some people who can get a lot done on their own. And then there's so much to do. Right? So you prioritize with purpose. Right? A lot of people start doing things and just because. Rather, you serve and you try to make your service be of true benefit. Because they say, مُقْتَضَى الْعَقْلِ اِخْتِيَارُ الْأَوْلَى. What is entailed by intelligence is to choose what is more important. Right? So, serve where there's the greatest, widest, and most lasting benefit. Right? But serve. Right? And the encouragements of serving are beyond count. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said that وَاللَّهُ فِي عَوْنِ الْعَبْدِ مَا دَامَ الْعَبْدُ فِي عَوْنِ أَخِيهِ. Allah is in the aid of His servant as long as His servant is in the aid of others. So serve. And with the blessed month coming, this is one of the greatest things one can commit to in life. Right? Take care of both aspects of this. And as you plan ahead, okay, what is my plan for cultivating my concern for Allah, right? My spiritual concern. But also, what's my plan to cultivate my social concern, without which my religion is only it's only half-baked. And these two halves are also pointed to in Surah Al-Asr, in the chapter on time, chapter 103 of the Quran. By time, the human is in loss, except those who believe and do righteous deeds. That's our spiritual concern. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ, and who call one another to truth, and who call one another to steadfastness. And that is the social concern. Right? But then, of course, there are levels of social concern. And of the highest of social concern, and there's a typo, please forgive me, who, not how. Who is better in affirmation than one who calls to God, does righteous deeds, and confirms, I am truly of those who submit, from the 41st surah, verse 33. Right? That the greatest expression of caring for the good of others is to call others to God. And how does one, and that is fundamental to the prophetic way. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, is commanded in the Quran to say, قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي, say, this is my way. أَدْعُو إِلَى اللَّهِ عَلَى بَصِيرَةٍ, say, this is my way. I call to God with insight. أَنَا وَمَنِ اتَّبَعَنِي, I and those who follow me. Right? Because what is the greatest good you can do for another? It's good that is eternal. But this calling to God, sometimes people call to God in all the wrong ways. Right? Right? There's a right way of doing everything. One of the desert Arabs walked by a man who'd purchased a camel, but didn't know how to ride it. So he figured that, you know what? The camel has a very useful rope, namely its tail. The camel was trying to climb, the man who just bought the camel was trying to climb the camel using the tail. And now, we don't have tails, but imagine someone was trying to climb you, tugging on your tail. So what the camel doing? Kept kicking the man off. So the desert Arab who walked by said, "Ma hakada ya Sa'du turkabul ibilu." O Sa'd, this is not how camels are climbed, right? There's a right way of doing this. It's nice you want to try to climb the camel, but not in this way. So sometimes people are calling to God, but in all the wrong ways. So how do we call to God, right? It begins with this sincere concern. It begins with wanting good for them, right? It's not that you want to add people to a checklist. Okay, 5 people converted. No, this out of sincere concern for the good of others. Secondly, through good character. Number 3, through mercy, because that's the way of our Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. 4, by upholding the prophetic example. By upholding the prophetic example in one's dealings, in one's conduct, in one's graciousness, in one's gentleness. With wisdom. Wisdom which considers what's the right way of doing something. With consideration, looking at consequences. With good words. But this requires knowledge and guidance to be fruitful, right? And it requires keeping connected to prophetic teachings. And both of these apply whether one's service is to be part of the call to the prophetic way, right? And there's many projects in our community engaged in this concern for knowledge and guidance. But also it applies to every other form of service. You want to serve fruitfully, be connected with prophetic guidance. Because anything that you do, if you do it infused with prophetic concern, with prophetic knowledge and guidance, you will beautify that action. Right? All beauty is encompassed in the prophetic example. Right? There are many charities out there. It's like there's a charity, and I know the charity personally, they're sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars, and there's a sister who reached out, and she's in urgent need, and she has health issues. So they said, well, we have to do due diligence. They gave her 16 pages to fill out, and she's an emergency case. She's got a large number of kids, I don't know how many, but 4 or 5, and she's in ill health and really stressed out. Just fill this out. I said, can you help me? She said, no, please fill this out and we'll get back to you. And we need a week before we can process this. Right? But that's not prophetic teachings. Right? Prophetic teachings are that mercy over even justice. Right? Right. You have mercy towards your enemies. The Prophet was praying for the eternal success of those who were trying to kill him in battle. Right? So we need to infuse that in all our expressions of social concern. So this is a little bit of one of the integral parts of what it means to have religion in our lives, right? It's to nurture this sincere concern, right? And I'd advise myself and each of you to have a clear spiritual plan of how you will cultivate your spiritual concern for Allah, for the Book of Allah, for the Messenger of Allah, but also how you will cultivate social concern in your public engagement, but also in your personal circles, your family, amongst your friends. Right? It's disgraceful that often you'll run into someone and you ask them about their best friend. How is so-and-so doing? So, I haven't been in touch with him for months. Why? I'm really busy. But the same person tells you that I'm addicted to playing, and you can name whatever game that they're addicted to playing. Right? So, have a plan to strive to excel in these two. Because who is the righteous believer? The righteous believer is one who fulfills the rights of Allah with excellence and who fulfills the rights of Allah's creation with excellence. And we'll leave you with a few recommendations. A book that should be a life companion is this work of 40 prophetic sayings, Imam Nawawi's 40 hadith. And this will be available next week as an on-demand course, or this week, sorry, as an on-demand course. It's an in-depth, we have an on-demand course explaining it, but even the text itself, and if you Google it, you can find multiple translations floating online for it. These are 40 prophetic teachings that the message of Islam revolves around. And it's something worth reading and rereading and reflecting upon, that how do I actualize these prophetic teachings? One of which is the prophetic teaching that religion is sincere concern. The second, we need to look at the prophetic heart, right? To try to cultivate an understanding of what was the relationship of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, like with his Lord, right? How was the Prophet's relationship with his creation? And we try to cover this in a class that we did here at the Hub a year or two ago, called the prophetic heart, or the Prophet's heart. The Prophet's heart, right? The Prophet's relationship with Allah and the Prophet's relationship with Allah's creation, taking incidents from the life of the Prophet as an example. Finally, there's a text that every house should have, and this is called the Gardens of the Righteous. The Gardens of the Righteous, by the same author, Imam Nawawi, which he compiled about 2,000 of the sayings of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. And this is available through Firdaus Books. It's a wonderful work. And it's called the Gardens of the Righteous because the idea is, how do you get there? This is the manual towards that destination. Right? That you want to be in the Gardens of the Righteous, which is paradise. How do you get there? This is the manual on how. So these are some things to reflect on, and how to cultivate the fruits of our faith. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for steadfastness and success. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. There's a